Good morning. Good to be with you. Today I wanted to talk about what is so scary about grace. And I wanted to start with a list of identifiers that make you an Episcopalian. You probably have seen these lists as they get circulated. The lists always start with, you know you're an Episcopalian when. So, you know you're an Episcopalian when it is 100 degrees with 90% humidity and you still have coffee after the service. You know you're an Episcopalian when you hear something really funny during a sermon and smile as loudly as you can. You know you're an Episcopalian when donuts are a line item in the church budget, just like coffee. And when you watch Star Wars and they say that may the force be with you, and you respond, and also with you. And lastly, you know you're an Episcopalian when it takes 10 minutes to say goodbye. That's a pretty good summary of all of us. We like our routine. We are a polite group of people. We're not the loudest at a party, somewhat understated, but we love each other. We love each other deeply. It's that same kind of human nature that makes conflict or telling the hard truth hard for us in particular. If someone does something wrong or is offensive at a party, we try to mask over that or move the conversation along. And I think our hesitancy is that we fear it would create a conflict or the conversation might get a little bit out of control. We might create a situation that we would rather not, so we try to keep things contained and predictable. Being out of control is a challenge for those of us who like structure. We follow an ordered service. God forbid we find ourselves on the wrong page or standing at the wrong moment in the liturgy. And yet both of our readings for today from the Old Testament and from the Gospel push our fears about being out of control. So, let's dive in. In our Old Testament lesson from Amos, the prophet Amos is speaking truth to the people of Israel during a time of great prosperity and peace. He's preaching a message that you wouldn't think he would, and he's creating conflict. The culture at the time took great comfort in their prosperity and took their signal that all was okay because financially they were doing well. It's kind of like, well, if the market's up, things must be good. Rather than saying life is good, so rejoice, Amos preaches to them that this prosperity, this comfort, this security that they cherish was made at the expense of others. That what they had developed is an underclass. And Amos reminds them that people come before prosperity and that community and God are what shape our lives and ground us in our identity. So Amos's culture was not God's vision for God's people. So Amos says to them, and I quote, "You sell the needy for a pair of sandals." That's how insignificant those who are in need have become. And that they can't wait for the religious festivals to end so they can get back to making money. There's no time to celebrate God in their lives, and God and the vulnerable have been pushed aside according to Amos. And what Amos is saying is that their lives have become empty even though they thought they were fulfilled. And their sense of community small, and their souls were thirsty. And by the way, within a generation, all this comfort would go away. What Amos said in our reading would in fact come to pass. God's people would lose their land to a neighboring nation. The temple would be destroyed. They would drift without that center mooring. And they themselves would struggle to find God as their center for some time. And the irony is that they would become the vulnerable. Lest we think that, get the impression that this message was just a harsh rant by Amos, it's actually a message of hope, a message of new prosperity, new possibility. Amos is preaching from a famous holy site. It was a place of promise. Everyone listening would have known this. It's the same location where Jacob, one of the great patriarchs in Israel, had that amazing dream of the ladder going up to heaven and angels descending and ascending that ladder. And Jacob names this place Bethel, the house of God. So even though this message was difficult for Amos's audience, because of the location, being the place of Jacob's great dream, Amos was saying that the heavens and God are very close to you. They are among you. but your soul will thirst until you begin to care for the poor who are in your midst. He was kind of like trying to shock the system back into health. He was putting the spiritual defibrillator on the people of Israel to get a heartbeat going again. Well, Amos is preaching in a place where God is near to a people who are caught in their material intoxication. He's reminding them that their hearts are distracted and distant from what they really are seeking. And here is where our gospel lesson can come in and be helpful and encouraging. It's a very short and familiar story about hospitality, but precise in its diagnosis. Mary and Martha are hosting Jesus and his disciples. Lazarus, their brother, was the one raised from the dead. Martha is busy in the kitchen preparing the food, distracted by the task of hosting. The hows of the evening. How is this meal going to be prepared? How are our guests going to feel cared for as family? Martha's busy in the kitchen, feeling resentful that her sister Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet, enjoying his teaching. So she complains to Jesus, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me." Jesus says so compassionately, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing, and Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her." Mary has become this icon for us for taking the great pause in the midst of life and busyness and pressure to listen and learn from the wisdom of God. Why is Jesus here? Not in her house, but here among them. Mary is concerned with the why. Why is the question of faith. Why am I here? Why don't I know the nature of Jesus' teaching? I'm certain that he is answering Mary's why with a story about love. Rabbi David Wolpe, in his book, Why Faith Matters, arrives at this culminating moment in his argument that faith is critical to human nature. And he recalls this story told by Primo Levi in his book, Survival in Auschwitz. And Levi was recounting in this book his time in the camp while suffering. And he was suffering from thirst, so he broke off an icicle that was outside of the barracks window. And a nearby guard, seeing this, snatched it from him. And Levi simply asked, "Why?" And the guard simply said, "Here, there is no why." And Wolpe goes on to say, the greatest terror is if the universe presents a blank face. If, as in the camp, there really is no why. In the camp, there is no why, no freedom, no inquiry, no growth or curiosity or existential questions about life. Here, there is no why. But with faith and in God's presence, it is different. It is in the presence of Jesus that Mary finds her question of why to be responded to dwell in the greater presence of God, to be loved into belonging, and to know the greater truth of life itself. We see this behavior among us. Whenever there's a national crisis, we turn to church. We come here, sitting among ourselves, dwelling in the presence of God, asking the question of why in our hearts. When life becomes overwhelming, we have two paths to consider: the busyness of Martha or the seeking heart of Mary. It is in moments of stress that we react in order to create security. We double down on our organizational skills in order to create a non-chaotic environment around us. We can overfunction in order to create some sense of understanding and predictability. We can choose activity over intimacy with God and others. It's what the poet David White calls thinking that velocity is the answer to life's complexity. That doing things faster or in greater amount will solve the real dilemma, the why, that is taking place, rather than pausing and exploring the why behind it all. This is where Mary, in our gospel lesson, becomes our teacher. And isn't this really what Amos was preaching to the people of Israel? To pause and to dwell in the presence of God, to return and to be renewed, to seek the wisdom from above? But grace, God's favor, while comforting, is actually scary. Because in order for grace to be grace, in order for it to be a gift from God, we have to let go of control. We have to be, as Episcopalians, out of control, which means we are no longer the ones writing the script of our lives. It means dwelling in God and being okay with the unpredictability of it all. We're willing to pause and let God write our biography, for God to guide the next step and to love us as we take it, to know the strength that is found there. Surrendering to God is easy when life is calm. I've just come back from 3 weeks at the Cape Cod. I'm telling you, it's easy to surrender to God there in the midst of a lack of busyness and cool temperatures, right? When I ask the question, what is scary about grace? It is because it involves us being willing to be out of control and to give that control and leadership in your lives over to the God who gave you life. It means putting down our default thinking that velocity is the answer to life's complexity, and requires surrender in the midst of anxiety and being okay and to be vulnerable. Sometimes we think these places where we're seeking answers, these dry places, are really unfertile places, but that is simply not true. It's why Amos is preaching the sobering truth in the location of Jacob's great dream. It's why Jesus tells Martha that Mary has chosen the better way, and what she has received will not be taken away from her. Take some time this week to hear the invitation of our lessons, to dwell in the presence of God in the midst of life's busyness and complexity, not to allow our anxiety to limit our listening or our learning in moments of being fully known and fully loved. Take time for silence and listening this week. And may our orientation in life be true and focused on the one who loves us through all of it. Amen.